So now, first of all, I would like to say or highlight that it's quite unique for a company to discuss this topic openly, especially with other, iGaming companies. But what we always say is, at Betsson, diversity and inclusion is not a one company thing. This is why we always try to involve other companies in our conferences, in our networks, and so on, because we cannot drive it alone. We need to drive it together. So now we talked about how to approach the gender pay gap from a company perspective. So what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about individuals. How do we approach it from an individual perspective? So the title of the next panel is Negotiation Skills, Imposter Syndrome, and the Gender Pay Gap. Okay? So I would like to welcome onto the stage Fiona. She's the Chief HR Officer at Catena Media. Thank you. And we also have Alexia with us. She is the Global HR Business Partner at Kindred. Liesbeth is also with us. She's the Head of Global Sustainability at NeoGames. And also Fran, who is the Headhunter. So she has a little bit more insight into the recruitment side of it. Okay?
Should we grab a chair?
We're going to stand?
Yes.
Can we,
some chairs?
Can we just grab chairs? It feels a little bit weird standing, I think, in front of everyone.
It would be ideal.
I'm just going to pass quickly.
So let's get one here.
Yeah, we have one.
Okay, so thank you for joining us, everyone, and thanks for the introduction. So our session is just a little bit more of a conversation and sharing some of our own experiences, and then obviously we'll certainly open up for questions and things as well. But I thought I would just start us off with a little bit more for the audience of what is imposter syndrome, because I'm not sure whether everyone has heard that term before and has an understanding of what it is before we start talking about what it's meant for each of us. So there is a definition, which I do have my notebook, so my memory's not great. It's described as a condition of feeling anxious and not experiencing success internally, despite being high-performing in external and objective ways. What does that mean? Basically, it means having feelings of self-doubt and maybe inadequacy, comparing yourself to other people, and those types of general feelings. Now, clearly, this is something that is not just about women. This is something that everyone can experience and probably experiences at some stage in their career. However, a study that KPMG did has found that 75% of executive women have all experienced this at some point in their career. So let's kick it off. Alexia, I'm going to go to you, you're sitting next to me. Is this something that you feel that you've experienced or dealt with at some point in your career?
Okay, so we're going to the personal immediately.
Yes.
wasn't expecting that.
We're going to get straight in there.
No. I would say definitely yes. However, I am going to make some personal with my work experience as well. Yeah. I personally do feel, yes, that I've passed through it, but also when I witnessed also interviews, for example, I didn't witness this a lot with women rather than with men, and I'll explain. Research shows as well, and we have a tendency as well, that when we see a job description or we apply for a role, there are certain tasks that you need to do in order to get the role, and then it is proven that when men, for example, know that they are able to do 8 or 7 tasks out of 10, they still would go for an interview, they would still feel confident, and they would still apply, and they believe that they will get the job. Instead, women act differently, they behave differently, and if they do not hit the 10 out of 10 in the tasks, they won't even bother to apply. And this is why maybe we have more males applying for roles. That's why we have more males applying for training to develop themselves, etc., etc. So back to your questions, I do feel that because we are wired differently, I feel. And not only wired differently, I think that even cultural expectations and the way we were brought up, I think we were meant to think that way rather than anything else.
Okay.
Yes.
So Fran, obviously,
Nodding a lot.
yes, exactly, lots of nodding there. And you see this probably from the other side as well when
Yes,
you're dealing with
absolutely.
candidates. So maybe talk us through, a couple of examples and how you see this, really playing out in different situations.
I mean, Alexia made some very pertinent comments with regards to job applications, where the career sort of recruitment process starts is during the application stage. And it is true that women would apply for jobs if they meet all, or at least, 9 out of 10 criteria, whereas men would go with 8, 7, or we see how it goes when we meet them. And this has been across the board, not only in Malta, but across the world. And in my experience as a headhunter, which is too long for my sins and what I'd rather admit, is that even during the interview process, women are a lot more specific with regards to their skill set, whereas men have a more relaxed way of conveying their skills and what they can bring to the table. They tend to speak a lot in the future, whereas women tend to speak a lot in the past, so to bring what they've done, sort of, to demonstrate and so on. And some of the present, very few go into the future and what they could bring on board. And one element here, I mean, I don't know if there are any studies related to this, but this is more due to personal observation, is, as Alexia said, we are wired that way, or there are cultural elements. I like you to think of, small kids. You have a boy and a girl, they're 7 years old. If a boy throws water on someone and runs around, I don't do that, but let them, boys will be boys. Yes, a girl does the same thing, and it'll be like, no, a girl should not do this, it should not behave this way. So that conditioning and how we perceive ourselves in terms of the value and what we must fulfill, it's already unbalanced from a very young age. You're a girl, you have to sit that way, you put bows in your hair and what have you. So if we want to change things, we need to start from the beginning. And even though, if you're not a parent, you are an aunt, or maybe, you know kids and your friends have them, it's how we speak to them and to try to recognize the narrative that we use when it comes to expectations.
Liesbeth, nodding down that end as well. And so carry on from that, obviously, with any thoughts that you had, and then we have a lot of topics, and so let's...
I will tie them in a bit.
Yeah, exactly, into the gender pay gap, because obviously that and the imposter syndrome are very related as well.
And negotiation skills as well. To be honest, the term imposter syndrome, I don't like it at all. It feels like you're being a fraud, and why do we need to discuss this in a forum that's mostly focused on how we want to lift up women? And actually, for a long time, I didn't hear about this term, and I was like, oh, what is it? And you start thinking, oh, does it apply to me? And you will find ways how it can have applied to you in the past, or it will. So I don't like this term at all. I think it shouldn't be there. Of course, I don't want to not discuss things that are not happening, but I think having these kind of terms will maybe make it worse. When it comes to like the gender pay gap, we've seen from Lena as well, that when you look at the pyramid from the workforce, more or less, the lower level jobs, they are pretty equal. But then when you go up in the hierarchy, that gets less and less. And actually boards, management, top management levels are very non-diverse, are not very inclusive either. And this, I think, where we really need to focus on. How can women break those glass ceilings, what you heard about? And I think negotiation skills come apart in there, because it can be that women perhaps feel when they become a mom or anything else in life, they feel like, can I do the job and be a mom? And do fathers have that too? So maybe that's where I can maybe see a bit of imposter syndrome, like maybe I need to step it back. Can I push my career as hard as I want to? Yeah. Negotiation skills, I think it's so valuable for everyone, especially when it comes to like financial literacy of people. It's like a lot of men in boards, in shareholders. The shareholders, they advise the boards advise the management, and being this all meal, this more like finance part, it's so important to take this on as a woman, like understand it, strive for equity and own shares and go there, read the financial reports. And you will find yourself at the table and knowing what to speak about and being part of that discussion.
Completely agree, and I think that is something that you mentioned when it comes to negotiation skills. Lena was obviously talking about if the brackets are now going to be published, that still means that there is still negotiation that needs to happen, and believing in your self-worth, and that's where I agree with you that putting a term on something like imposter syndrome, I think that labels it doesn't actually necessarily help with how we should approach it, but that at the core it's about that self-doubt and am I the best person to do this role? And that comes back to again kind of the 9 out of 10 criteria. Do I meet all those? And so I think that's something where for me there can be a lot that is done through mentors and coaching, and we hear a lot about that, and I know in all of the different sessions, but I firmly believe that where as an individual and as a female, I know that I've questioned through my career, whether I should actually be, in the role that I'm in, or sitting at the table with, the people having, various discussions and things like that. And it pops into your head. And one of the first things that you need to do is get outside of your head. Those thoughts and thinking that's only a downward spiral. And so we need to try and stop doing that as individuals. Be conscious, be aware of it, and that it can happen and that it does happen, but then also have some mechanisms and some tools to then try and help you with how to stop that, and then to how to actually build that self-worth. It's not so much confidence. Confidence can sometimes be, a lack of confidence can sometimes be confused with imposter syndrome or self-doubt. It's not so much about that. It's more feeling that you actually are completely adequate and that you're very capable and can push and do more, and that you're in the role for a very good reason.
It's very interesting you mentioned the word confidence, because I was reading a book last year. It was Developing a Confident Mind. And I'm going to pair it with what Heidi said yesterday in the HR Connect, her introductory speech. Because basically, when we mention even the terminology syndrome, most probably what we usually do is cater for that, no? And then we said, we say, what, look at the facts, embrace yourself, celebrate successes, recognize your failures, etc., etc. But maybe if we go a step back and say, okay, how are we going to develop? Let's look at it, what Heidi said, let's look at it from a different angle. Yeah. So how are we going to develop a confident mind? And the author of this book, once in one of the passages, he said, a top performer or a performer has no choice but to be confident, because otherwise you will introduce mediocrity to the game, you will introduce insecurity to the game, and if you're selling a product, there's no room for that, no? Okay. So you have to have a confident mindset. And then he brought up the example of, and this is back to my argument, when we go down a flight of stairs, do we really think about, first we have to go with the right foot, and then with the left foot, and then again with the right, no, because we stumble and we fall, no? So we don't do that, we just do it confidently, no? Because we know that we can do it. So why can't we apply the same, terminology when we go and apply for a job, when we go and apply? Because, if we develop that confident mind, then we can do it. I thought it's interesting because you mentioned that confidence piece. Yes, I think it's another way to look at it.
I take a very similar view, but I'd like to mention something when it comes to negotiation skills, because as we saw earlier with regards to the EU pay transparency gap, for example, this will help in terms of the visibility and giving certain tools to disadvantaged groups of people, whether they would be women or neurodiverse talents or minorities or any disadvantaged group in terms of the pay scale. But it is not the solution, and this is where I'm fearful a little bit, because if we rely on that to get us out of where we are, it's not going to happen. I'm sorry to say this. It's like, hoping that because drugs are illegal, our kids are not going to take them. The law doesn't, the law is there to be followed by individuals who have the ethical inclination to do that, whether that law is there or not. So be very mindful to not rely on this as your tool to obtain the value. To obtain the value, it comes down to recognizing the limitations, whether we call it imposter syndrome or whatever, there are limitations of our brain and how we perceive things and how we look at things. And also understand that the perception of others has nothing to do with your value. And the reason that I say this is that there was a study in a magazine, I forgot, I think it was Forbes or something like that, I can't remember, but essentially women are less likely than men to initiate negotiation. And when they've looked at the reasons, some of them were quantifiable in terms of skills. They weren't really sure if they are strong enough in terms of the skill set, but actually a very high percentage of that, which was over 30%, which is quite high, was due to unknown factors, which essentially was that when one is in a negotiation, naturally they take a more assertive position because they express what is it that they want. And when a woman takes an assertive position in a negotiation, we shouldn't even call it when they take a position in a negotiation, they're perceived as aggressive.
Arrogant, yes.
Yes, arrogant, aggressive, difficult, and other terms that I'm not going to mention to this esteemed audience. I think we all know what it is. Everyone started laughing. We've been called that at least once in our professional life. So with that, we need to understand that the negotiation tension that happens is not because of our skills, but it could also be, and it is actually very likely to be due to perception. And that you just need to move past it. It's going to be very hard. It took me, a decade to move past it. And sometimes I'm still fearful. But the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. Naturally, this assumes one knows their skills to present them and to discuss them in an objective way based on value rather than, well, the law says. Well, the law says many things, At one point in the 1940s, the law said that you go to the camp if you're Jewish. So you don't wait for the law to dictate your value and what you need to fight for, what is right.
So, Liesbeth, have you got some personal experience that you can share in how you've negotiated, or maybe how other people have given you any information on that?
Yeah, I think this ties very much into biases around us, right?
Absolutely.
There's biases towards gender, towards ethnicity, religion, people of color, and all this diversity inclusion is really tied to that because everybody looks through their lens, and without knowing it or not, you have a bias towards your environment. And I think looking at like young people say, it starts early from education. Like, how do you approach a little boy when he does something good, or you see him good job, like you worked really hard on it. And often when you see a girl coming with a nice looking dress, you're like, oh, what a cute little dress, like not knowing that your first comment towards the boy was building somebody intrinsically, like you are focusing on someone's skills, which is good, and focusing on the girl, you have made a comment which is actually very extrinsic, which maybe later on will focus more on that one person wanting more external validation, while the other person feels like, I know I'm good because I have been built up from the inside. And this is really, we need to focus on building our teams, our people around us internally, like from inside up. I think that's so important, and that's really been a big shift, I think, in thinking over the last decades, overall in the workforce, but also how we approach girls first versus boys. In the workforce, actually, it was a colleague of mine who spoke to me, and she said, this one connection, just I have the feeling he only wants to work with men. And because of certain remarks, and we were discussing that, how to approach it. It's really hard, and you almost can't believe it, that's really happening, but that's still out there. And previous panel, like a a C-level person sits in a room with men, and then the client's male group's coming in and said, "Can I have a coffee?" towards the woman, because he assumes that this is the person, you know. But it's crazy. But it's happening. And how do you address it? Are you going to call it out on the spot? You don't want to make a big, fuss around it. Are you going to ignore it? But this needs to be addressed. And from a sustainability point of view, here is what we focus on, like how can we hold at least the workplace accountable for creating an environment that's diverse and inclusive. So having right policies in place, having no fear to speak up, having confident people in your HR team.
Yeah.
That's so important.
And a lot of training for managers as well.
Yeah, yes.
Just one personal experience. Instead of asking me to make coffee, to take notes.
Yeah.
So,
can you?
But it's the way to approach it, no? And say,
and
yes,
so what did you do?
Notes this time, but next week we'll take it in turns. So instead of making, no, luckily it wasn't coffee, but notes.
Yeah.
But I get your argument, 100%.
Yeah, definitely. Other thoughts or experiences in terms of negotiation? Because again, we've said negotiation skills. What I know that I've spoke years and years ago, I spoke to someone that I trusted very much for advice, a little bit more of a mentor type of role, and I remember asking for tips and ideas on how I could go into a conversation where I really felt that I wasn't being paid fairly for the role that I was doing. And there were a couple of things that really stood out and that I have taken with me and tried to share with other people as well and this goes for anything. If you don't ask, you don't get quite often. So, and then also thinking about what's the worst thing that could happen when you ask for a certain figure. And again, okay, if you're doing your job well, then hopefully it's not being fired. But otherwise, the worst thing that can happen is you're told no. So you're in no worse situation than you were before you asked. And so that's something that I think, whether it be about a promotion, whether it be about a salary increase, bear that in mind. There's not horrible things that are going to happen. And then the other one that I was always told as well is that get research, get information, get facts, get data, so that you actually go in with a very educated conversation. Again, obviously, as Fran said, sometimes that can be perceived a certain way. But I think thinking about your approach and what you're going in and what you're asking for and being able to validate why you're asking for that and what you think is the right number and having that data behind that is going to help you as well versus just plucking a number out of midair or not having done any of that thought process. So what else from your experience can you add on to that as well, maybe?
I can add, don't be your own barrier, because in my previous experience, I would say, no, my package is fine, or not necessarily package, even tasks, even roles, etc. Because you would say, no, because I need flexibility. And once a mentor had told me, but at the end of the day, you need flexibility, or you have flexibility, but everyone has flexibility. So why are you bringing excuses in order to justify your own situation?
That's a really good point. I know that's something that we've all done that. As you said, justified. Well, yes, because I'm able to leave and go and pick up the kids, or I'm able to do this, and so.
And looking back, there's always something, no?
Always.
It's an operation coming, or you need to take care of something. There's always an excuse,
there's always
no?
Something. Yes, absolutely. And speaking of justifying things. In negotiations, it's very important to learn how to be comfortable with silence. Okay, what does that mean? So in the example that you gave, that you feel you're not appropriately remunerated, and you would like to address that with the company, you send an email and you say, or you speak with your manager, whatever form of communication it may be, say, I would like to discuss my remuneration. Stop there. Not because, no, I'd like to discuss, meeting booked. Called you today because XYZ reason. Zip. Wait. It's going to be very uncomfortable. It's very hard to do. But the more you talk, the more you're going to talk yourself down, because by talking, explaining, justifying. We're not doing scientific research here to run patterns and models, right, to demonstrate our theories and hypotheses. Negotiations is a human interaction. So you need to learn to be comfortable with silence and let the other person speak as well, and gather information from them and give that break in between the discussion so you can also digest and see how you're going to react to it as well.
It's a really, really good one. We all know that from interviews as well, that most people don't like silence and try and fill the silence.
Yes.
And doing that ourselves, we're just going to do ourselves a disjustice,
So I like to add to that a little bit about work-life balance. I think it ties in as well, and maybe it reflects more on women, because when, for example, they start a family and want to raise a child, they are the one that has to physically take off work to, give birth and take care of the kid for at least 3-4 months in Malta, and probably a bit longer. But yeah, it's very hard to find that balance, and I think it's not achievable. Like, you will really try to strive for something that's perfection, which can also be your worst enemy, because you're always chasing something that you feel like you can't keep up. So it's also important to embrace the situation where you're in, and embrace the mess, and do what you can here. And it doesn't only matter for having that family. It can also be you starting your business venture. There's like loads of stuff going on. And I think work-life balance, it should be more like a state, like where you feel like you're doing your part for your family or in your household and somebody else, but let's not try to find that equal balance. We all do our part, and we are happy with that. And I think that's important as well, to feel confident in your work and not too stressing yourself out too much at home and at work.
Oh, completely. I've often felt that I'm failing at both at the same time. Failing at home, failing at work, trying to strive for perfection everywhere. That is just not possible. No. And so give yourself a break. Be kind. Don't set the bar too high. It is not achievable in that respect. And then that in turn, I think, just does. It alleviates the pressure, and then you don't feel like you're actually failing everywhere. Yeah. Good one.
I agree.
Do we have some other comments that we want to make, or do we want to open up for questions? I'm not sure how we're doing
Maybe
the time. Okay.
Some questions would be good. Yeah. There we have.
Yes.
Thank you. I hope I can say this coherently, because now I realised everyone's looking. Basically, there was talk, or there was advice about, it's actually what I do tell my children: if you don't ask, you don't get. And I also say, what's the worst that can happen? And the worst that can happen is you're told no. But now I'm going to be a massive hypocrite and say that actually, when you said that, I imagined myself, in a meeting, I run my own business, in a meeting, pitching for, a higher rate than what they're willing to pay. And my internal, panicked voice sort of thought, okay, well, the worst that can happen is you leave that meeting, and because of all this sort of subconscious or conscious stuff that goes on, where we're seen as aggressive, arrogant, pushy, a bit overconfident, a bit full of herself, is there perhaps actually a lasting negative legacy? That it doesn't just stop at, they said no, we had a constructive discussion, that actually, in fact, in their mind now, you're trouble, and they just stay away from you. You don't get the promotion, you don't get asked to do this or that, you're awkward. That's my,
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a really valid question. I think it depends on what you ask for. So as much as I've said, obviously, don't be afraid to ask, you need to be realistic. What is the state of the business at the time of you actually asking? What are the revenue numbers being met, and is the business actually doing well, or is it not? I mean, clearly, if the business isn't doing well, then don't be asking for huge increases. Think about the timing of when you're asking as well. But then again, that research and that data, so that what you're asking for is backed up by information. You've maybe taken on additional tasks. You highlight those. You highlight the value that you're adding and what that means, and to try and quantify that, and then ask for something that's realistic. And I think in that case, then, if you do see that there is then a backlash for that, then you're clearly not in the right company. But because I think, we as adults, we should be able to have these conversations and there shouldn't be those repercussions. I'm not saying that there's not, and I think there will, again, we've probably all experienced those, and unfortunately people will still, but that's where just be ready, be realistic, and actually then have a proper discussion and link it to the business and to financials and to targets and those types of things.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add to that, if I may,
Yes.
very quickly, because it's a very valid question, and I think something that a lot of us are very fearful of. When negotiating, you need to be prepared to leave the table. Okay, if you negotiate without being prepared to walk away from the negotiation, you are not negotiating. What you're doing is, well, we're at iGaming Next, you're gambling. You might get it, you may not. So in order for negotiations to be successful, you must be prepared to walk away if your interests are not aligned. Mm-hmm. Now, have a plan B as well when you do that, just in case. Sometimes it won't be possible. Sometimes you have to stand up for what is right. I've done that numerous times, and people were telling me, Fran, you're crazy. People were saying this, that, and the other. Oh, if I would stop for everyone that called me names and stuff, I would never get anywhere. So that's very important to bear in mind when you're negotiating. Be prepared to walk away. If not, you're not negotiating. Buy your time for when you're ready.
Don't threaten, no. One tip. From the HR side, if someone comes to us and says, you give me this or I'm going, then it doesn't work so well.
Yeah.
Sorry, another question?
2.
I would just have one more question regarding negotiation. And what would you do, if your negotiation is not going very well? And there is a limit, and I have to say. Would you take it as a threat or a negotiation when you say, on this way I have to keep my eyes open?
I don't know. To be honest, personally, I think you need to be prepared, because what's the worst that can happen? They say no, but you have to be prepared for the no, and you have to realize as well that you might be a different person after the no. You might behave differently, you might think differently, etc. So if you are not prepared for the no, personally, I wouldn't go for it. It's the same when you apply for a job, no?
Yes,
and
yes.
You might get an offer, you might not get an offer. But how is that going to impact you?
Agreed.
Will it affect your self-esteem? Can you handle it? Because if you can't handle it, I wouldn't even go and apply.
Agreed.
So this is how I would approach it personally.
Mm-hmm. And I think a good way...
Thank you so much. Sorry, just one more to add. It's, your values, your putting this down for the company, and you are ready to say no, and that's when you are saying, on that way I have to keep my eyes open, which means you still feel your duties, but if an opportunity comes in front of you, you will take it, and your manager basically knows that straight away.
I see your point, but I think that creates a bit of negativity in your team, of course, and are people going to trust you because they know maybe next week he's not here anymore? I think it has a lot to do with communication as well. I mean, when you want to sell your goods on the market, you have it clear, like we're going to negotiate on a price and then it's sold. But here it's much more sensitive. And you can approach your HR as well, saying like, what are the steps I have to take to go here? I'm an ambitious person, I want to make a career. And maybe you can make like a program together and get there and see if it can be more clear what needs to be done for your next salary brackets. I think Lena was very interesting telling like how they stage that, and it's more clear nowadays when a person gets a promotion. You start at the beginning, there are so many steps, and every year we evaluate and you can go up. Yeah.
Hi. Wonderful session so far. So I can see there's like a scattering of men in here, but this is the third session I've been to that's discussed women's issues in the industry, and the audience has been predominantly women, which is quite unusual, obviously, in an iGaming setting where we're around 20% of the gender split in each organisation. So are we getting the right listeners in all of these rooms? Because some of the themes are quite repetitive and we could all probably give similar speeches ourselves. I just want to make sure that I guess decision makers in all the companies are actually hearing what's being said.
It's a really,
It's a very
really
good point,
valid
right?
question.
Observation.
Yes.
Very valid observation, indeed.
And no, I think, obviously I'm sure that Betsson and Len would agree that if we could actually be in the main hall and we could have everyone, then
Yes.
that would be great.
Be
Next year, that's a goal for next year. No, it's a valid point. And I think that falls on a lot of us in this room. I know that falls on a lot of us in HR. It falls on, kind of everyone to, as you said, to make sure that the decision makers actually have the right information and are aware of everything that we are discussing.
Yeah, and I think, sharing best practices on this feels people's more empowered to next time, ask for something or speak up and make sure that you have the right policies in place and push this more. And well done to all the men here. I'm very happy to see you.
And continue the conversations upstairs and with other people.
Yeah.
That they had the courage, to join. But yes, that's a very valid point. But I would also say that it would be ideal if more men, for example, would be present and encouraged to attend such discussions. But if it doesn't happen, then it's up to us again to improve ourselves and our confidence. And the wall is thick. I make a dent, you make a dent. At one point, the goddamn thing is going to come down. So men or not, so.
If I may add the point here, now we're talking about gender issues, but in reality, when it comes to diversity and inclusion conferences, we see certain demographics in the audience, right? Now you can say you're preaching to the choir, but my opinion is, so what do? We don't talk about it? Mm-hmm. I think it's valuable to at least have the conversation. And what I see is every conference we have, because this is the 5th conference we are organizing, we have more men in the room. We have more diverse audience. So it's not going to happen overnight, but I do see the difference in every conference we have. This is a valid point, absolutely. Thank you very much. I think we can go on forever on this topic. It's a very wide topic. But I do think it's a very valuable one because, earlier Lena presented the company perspective, how we do the pay gap analysis at Betsson, and we share this with you because we want the industry as a whole to improve. Again, diversity and inclusion is not a company thing. It's for all of us to work on. And then we approach it from an individual perspective, because oftentimes when we talk about the gender pay gap, people say perhaps women are not good at negotiating. They don't know how to negotiate for themselves. Yeah, it might be the case sometimes, but it might not be. So let's talk about it, and this is what we did today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Our link.